Time and time again in recent years, it's felt like frustrating inconsistencies have meant you the fans, us the media, them the drivers, and even to be honest, F1's officials don't actually know what's allowed or not in wheel-to-wheel racing. There's little worse in F1 than when you watch a great battle with two or more cars, things get a bit sketchy, and you just have no idea if it's going to result in a penalty or not. Whether it's overtaking on the inside or outside, lunging from far back, defending too aggressively, we've seen everything from hard but fair racing being punished to lairy over-the-top moves getting overlooked. Well, this year, something has changed to try to stop that. There's a new initiative to codify the rules of racing and outline what's legal or not, more specifically than ever. But you might not have noticed that because the specifics don't really seem to have been published anywhere. They've just been vaguely referenced in stewards' decisions at a couple of Grand Prix this season. What's happening is essentially a continuation of something you might have heard for a long time, about letting the drivers race. And this is a much more formal attempt at doing something very difficult, turning that wonderfully free principle into definitive regulations. 2 years ago, a set of informal racing guidelines was introduced to outline when a driver was entitled to space when overtaking on the inside and outside of corners. It had mixed success. They didn't work for every single corner profile on the F1 calendar or factor in how a battle between two cars can be so dynamic. Unsurprisingly, trying to specify car X needs to be this far alongside car Y just dumbed things down to an absurdly unrealistic degree, especially with no emphatic requirement to leave space on the exit of the corner. Those rules basically implied anything was fair game as long as you got your front wheels alongside the other driver's front wheels at the apex. It didn't seem to matter how much entry speed you took in or whether you ran the other car off the road on the exit. That vagueness was something Max Verstappen often used to good effect, and really, he was right to do so. What's typically considered fair comes second to doing what the rules say you can, or don't say you can't. It was widely agreed that something needed to be done to improve the situation. And in February this year, it was announced that the FIA Drivers Committee, the Circuit Commission and the Safety Department had worked together to create the first official driving standards guidelines. This will apply to all categories of circuit racing with the intention of being a consistent reference for drivers and officials, and by extension, all of us watching. At the time, two-time F1 World Champion Fernando Alonso said the guidelines will be crucial. But despite the fact they are clearly in use in F1 already, you haven't seen them yet because technically they still only exist in draft form and will become regulatory in 2025 when they are enshrined in an appendix to the FIA International Sporting Code. Before we get into the specific examples the guidelines lay out, let's address some important caveats. First, they aren't binding. They are just a guide to the decision-making process of the stewards, who will still exercise discretion. There's also clear acknowledgement in them that racing is a dynamic process, which stresses that the specific relative positions cited in the guidelines are just one element. That is so important, and a clear distinction on what existed before. Factors the stewards will always look at when reviewing an incident include how did the cars get to the incident, for example late braking, diving in, moving under braking, was the manoeuvre late or optimistic, what could the drivers reasonably see, know or anticipate, could the manoeuvre be completed on the track, was there understeer, oversteer or locking, did someone position or handle their car in a way that contributed to the incident, did the type of corner contribute to the incident, for example camber, curbs, curves or apexes, and what were the relative tyre compounds, age and grip levels. All of these were relevant factors before, but it is good to emphatically make clear that they don't just get overridden by basic simplified guidance. The new guidelines get quite specific for different overtaking moves and different situations. For overtaking on the inside of a corner, a driver must be given room if they satisfy the following conditions. 1. Have their front axle at least alongside of the mirror of the other car, no later than the apex of the corner. 2. Be driven in a safe and controlled manner throughout the manoeuvre, which includes the entry, apex and exit. 3. Without deliberately forcing the other car off the track at the exit, which includes leaving a fair and acceptable width for the car being overtaken from the apex to the exit of the corner. And 4. Be able to make the corner within the track limits. This seems pretty straightforward, but it still has its drawbacks. For a case study in how these rules are applied, look to the recent Chinese Grand Prix weekend and an incident involving Alonso, who was one of the original poster boys of these guidelines. A multi-corner battle ended with Alonso attempting to repass Carlos Sainz into the slow turn 9 left-hander that follows the sweeping S's in the middle of the lap, and the two cars made contact. The stewards deemed Alonso caused the collision, but didn't say how. Looking at the guidelines, Alonso actually ticked most, if not all of the boxes. He's far enough alongside at the apex, he's in control even though it is a late move, he doesn't deliberately force signs off as the contact is accidental, and Alonso himself made the corner within track limits. Presumably the stewards were swayed by the other aforementioned factors and felt something else nudged what Alonso did into being against the rules. The problem is that, as we said, frustratingly the stewards' decision didn't state exactly what Alonso did wrong beyond causing a collision. This exposes a problem within this system. If there are going to be hardline rules with multiple conditions to police overtaking, then the officials need to actually tell us what somebody's done wrong. You can't tackle inconsistent, vague decision making with vague explanations, especially when a move like Alonso's, while certainly aggressive, didn't feel like the type designed to be punished with a 10-second time penalty and 3 licence penalty points. As for overtaking on the outside of a corner, we like that the guidelines acknowledge that it's a more difficult move to pull off. For a long time, drivers have been taught from karting all the way through the racing pyramid that if you try to hang it round the outside, you're at risk of running out of road. It's often been left up to how hard certain drivers race. Fairer drivers will leave a bit of room for their rivals, harder drivers will be more ruthless and edge them out. But in recent years, there has been a clear effort to define when it's essential for a driver to leave space, and that's the case in the new guidelines too. So for a driver to be given room when overtaken on the outside, including at the exit of the corner, the overtaking car must 1. Have the front axle at least alongside the front axle of the other car at the apex of the corner and to the exit, 2. Be driven in a safe and controlled manner throughout the manoeuvre, entry, apex and exit, 3. Be able to make the corner within the track limits. In a lot of cases, this is going to leave a driver at the mercy of their rivals or the law of physics. A good example would be turn 6 at the Red Bull Ring, the site of many side-by-side moments even in modern F1. Sometimes the car on the outside is legitimately entitled to more room, and the driver on the inside cannot run their rival out of road if they've held it alongside all the way through the corner. But if someone tries to pull alongside or past later in the corner, when the car on the inside has already committed to their speed and trajectory to the exit, they won't be entitled to room on the exit. This isn't intended to stop that kind of optimistic pass, it just means drivers have to accept the risks involved. We quite like this, as it's pretty close to being a live by the sword, die by the sword kind of rule. As was the case previously, the guidelines do try to tackle the awkward issue of how to approach chicanes and S-bends. In other words, what happens when a move into a sequence of turns starts with a car on the inside or outside, but that very quickly becomes the other side as the track changes direction. Here, things are very simple. There are 2 points to consider. 1. The guides for overtaking on the inside and outside may apply for each element of the combination. 2. However, priority will be given to the first corner element, so if you didn't fully follow the guidelines at the first corner, then you don't get the benefit at the second. Let's take the Senna S at Interlagos as an example. We've seen drivers collide at the second part before, like Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton in 2022, as a move around the outside in the first part puts that car on the inside for the second. Unless you're at least fully alongside from apex to exit through the left-hand turn 1 there, you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt if you then try to hang on to the inside at turn 2. Then you're just relying on the car on the outside doing you a massive favour to avoid contact, but if there is contact, you being on the inside means you're likely to get a penalty. A good case for this attempted clarification is that it becomes impossible to watch F1's increasingly rare moments of box office action if you don't have a good idea of what's crossing the line in a fight. It just leads to confusion and arguments, which isn't the right kind of debate F1 should be stoking. It's just as frustrating when you see drivers get away with crossing the line as it is when what seems like a hard but fair pass gets slapped with a penalty. We'll need some time to see if the rules that have been created are widely, commonly understood, although it's not a great look for them that in the space of a couple of months, Alonso's gone from advocating the guidelines to being punished for breaking them, even though he felt what he did was okay. Of course, this kind of thing is always going to be subjective to a degree, which means it's not just Alonso or us disagreeing that his move did or didn't fulfill one of these new conditions, it guarantees that different officials will have their own views on different incidents as well. You'll never get complete consistency, but as long as that's understood, it could be workable as a long-term framework. It's at least rooted in something sensible, as is a tweak in connection to this to turn the weak 5-second time penalty into a baseline 10-second penalty for 2024. It's all designed to warn drivers off unfair driving and make it clear where the line is. It's fair to ask though whether this has all gone too far. Have we disappeared down a rabbit hole with complex rules for something inherently difficult, if not impossible, to define, and are officials too trigger happy in F1 to dish out penalties in general? It would certainly be a lot easier if drivers and officials all understood that you just need a bit of give and take in battle, that sometimes there will be contact, and not every incident needs to be somebody's fault. We'd have fewer penalties, fewer irritating radio messages where drivers and teams are grassing on each other, and fewer confusing situations where you're trying to break down a multi-point document to work out why one driver was more at fault for a collision than another. These new guidelines might work, but if F1's racing reality was a bit simpler, they wouldn't need to exist at all.